So, where we left off talking about the nations, I had a rudimentary map drawn up just for visual appeal, but this was actually a map I remember I drew a long time ago that has all the important nations really listed right here. So, as you can see, it's a lot more detailed, but also, again, it's all basically in conceptual terms. So we talked a lot about Primordia, a little bit about Tasphere and Dracovern. Now we're going to go into really the politics that shapes everything. So first of all, as you can see, I tried to color coordinate the alliances. As you can see right here, both Celesta, Solera, and Lunera all are colored in the same way. That is to show that Celesta and Solera and Lunera are like colonies. So Celesta is the mainland, right here. Oh, my bad. That is not a good color to use. So, right here you got Celesta being the big dog, and then you have Solera and Lunera being the colonies. And of course, right here, Lunera also owns the island over there. And this is a result of their missionary efforts. Again, we told you that they're a religious country. Every country has a real good background and base and culture that it's tied to. So first of all, remember how we talked about Dracovern? As you'll notice, I also put these two areas in a red shade to show that Dracovern conquered these areas. So remember how I said that there was a slave trade going on, slavery? Well, the slavery really comes over here. This whole entire continent was once called Ender, but it was conquered by Dracovern. And actually, Arcona, as you can see, definitely did their own stuff. They kept the name Ender for the place that Arcona captured, but Dracovern rather conquered this place, and it's simply just a colony. Like, it has little government. It's really just how you can imagine how the African slave trade went on along, not the Swahili coast, but along Africa, especially the west side. And right here, this grayness, this is really interesting. I'll make it in red. This is called the No Man's Land. Because of the extensive destruction of the government that was once here, really, No Man's Land became a lawless wasteland. As you can think of right now, the best way to explain it would be, I'd rather not draw parallels to politics. So let's just say it's a place without any government, rebellion. It's really down to tribalism. Also right here, you can see the nation of Kor. It's actually more of a desert. And remember I told you that Mercer, when he established Primordia, that he defeated the terrorists called the Sons of Perdition? Well, this is where their actual stronghold was. So when Mercer did his little, how would I say, crusade, he really went down this path. He started in Ilia, went to Tasphere, and then carved his path through Kor and took over Primordia. Kor, on the other hand, it's just a desert. There's not a lot of civilization there. But, again, there were strongholds for the Sons of Perdition that he needed to take out. But the main civilization was Primordia. So after Mercer's whole crusade, Kor is now, again, lawless, just a desert. But there's still people and towns and settlements, but they have no governing body. Also, right here, this is a part of land of Tasphere that Dracovern has conquered and taken over the years. Sometime after Mercer's crusade and before the beginning of the book, this is really Dracovern territory. So if I want to make Dracovern red, this is Dracovern territory, and so is this. But of course, as you can see, I did outline it with blue because as the story goes, the territory alliances eventually shift. And just like that, Tasphere eventually gets its land back. Talking about the other nations that are very important, Mercer actually was royalty from Arcona. So this is where Mercer came from. So this is... Ooh, that is way too fat. So this is Mercer's homeland. And so now we can talk about Mercer's family. Again, they are also a monarchy. And even though Dracovern is known for its slavery, they also do practice slavery. just not as much as Dracovern does. It's not their entire economy. They still conquered Ender, but they really keep slavery over here and in their trades with Dracovern. Arcona and Dracovern are an interesting couple. They look like they're about to kill each other, but they both realize that there are other nations that are much more important, especially Celesta with its missionary efforts. As the story begins, a lot of Celestians try to go into Shiro to convert them, but Shiro is a lot of a spiritual monk culture, so it's very resistant. But Ilia actually is very receptive to Celesta's missionary efforts. Also, I'll talk about Neng in a minute. So, going back to Arcona, sorry about that. You had the king during Mercer's time when he was just a prince. It was King Croesus and his 3 sons. You had Mercer and his 2 twin brothers, Nolus and Volus. When Mercer and Nolus departed and went on their journey, the obvious successor was Volus, and he became the king. So, that is the current leader of Arcona as the story begins. Croesus dies of old age, or so it has been said, and he is now the king. Also, Shiro's really interesting, is they believe in non-aggression. They are very much a monk culture. So they're non-aggressive. They do not like being involved in politics, so they are a neutral zone, really. But the only problem here is Dracovern does not care. Dracovern actually regularly attacks Shiro, taking advantage of their peaceful culture and taking some of them as slaves. So, among the slaves in Dracovern are Shiroans and Endarians. So, if you think of Ender, Ender is really the Africa of this world. Just absolutely taken advantage of by every country you can think of and left destroyed. That's really Dracovern's politics. Celesta is really important because, again, Celesta is ruled by the 7 stars. And since it is a theocracy, you can imagine how absolute their power is. So the 7 stars govern not just the church, but also the country of Celesta. So as people in Ilia are converted, they have their alliance to the 7 stars and not to the leadership of Ilia. So it's like a conflict of interest sort of thing. Now we're going to talk about Ilia. Ilia is a union. That means it is made up by several smaller kingdoms. And they are governed by the greatest of the families. So their leader is the biggest kingdom, or just the greatest family. But the thing is this can regularly change. So Ilia is known for its sort of democratic process. They don't vote on what's the greatest family, but rather the families within themselves can change the tides. But for the longest time, the greatest family is the family that is led by a very important character called Decker. He helps Mercer in his quest. So, off to the side, Mercer in his journey, he made many alliances. So if I were to list them all, of his alliances, he of course had people from Arcona. Garth was originally a soldier from Arcona. So, soldier from Arcona. And the reason why I'm going into detail about all this is because the politics really are important in this story. There are so many characters that are included that have impacts and so on, and it's all about politics, consequences, and so on. So the reason that Mercer is such an important character is because he was able to show a union between people. Again, you have Nolus. He is Arconian, or Archaean, my bad. He is an Archaean noble, just like Mercer is. Then you have Decker, who is an Ilian I'll say emissary, because he plays both a role in the family and as a bodyguard. So there's Decker, then there's Kintu, who is Endarian. He is an Endarian ranger. Then you have Orison. He is a Shiroan monk. Then there is Zeratius. He is a Celestian priest. He is actually more of a priest knight. And he pretty much fits the role of both being a priest but also a warrior. Let me see if I'm forgetting anyone. Also, from the group, these are pretty much the main people that are included that represent the other nations. Also, from Primordia itself, actually, a trader called Nico. He is I wouldn't call him Primordian, I'd rather call him a Corian. Or actually, it'll be more just core. He was a core trader. So he turned sides during the conflict to join Mercer. And from what I believe, there were people from all sides except for Tasvir, really. I'm trying to think of all the ethnicities that were included. And there wasn't a main character in Mercer's party from Tasvir. And there's a reason for that. So right there, you see how Mercer was able to unite all these nations against a greater threat of Kor. But it seems almost immediately after Kor was defeated, all these alliances were really shaky. And if you think about this right here, Garth was a soldier from Arcona who left with Mercer. So that means they didn't really have any ties back to Arcona. So was Nolus. He was when Mercer and Nolus left, they were pretty much banned from returning. The brother Volus pretty much called them, refugees. Decker, he was actually a political power. Kintu was a political power because he led a tribe. But Orison, on the other hand, he was a Shiroan monk, but he was more of a wanderer, not a refugee. I'm trying to think of the term. A group of people who wander. I know there's a term for it, but I'm trying to... I can't remember at the moment. Zeratius, on the other hand, he was a Celestian priest and a knight, so he had political power. But of course, Nico was a traitor. So of all this, Mercer only had good relationships with Ilia, parts of Ender, and Celesta. So as you can see, when Mercer established Primordia, Primordia was on good terms with Ilia. But that's about it. And of course Celesta, but Celesta is so far away that Celesta could offer very little help. Tasvir was always very very unhelpful, if that makes sense. And of course, again, as you can see, I wouldn't say he was an ally with Shiro, because again, Shiro is neutral. They do not make allies, they do not make alliances, so on and so forth. So again, Dracovern and Arcona were not friends of the West. So this is where the whole idea that the West suddenly becomes unified, except for, of course, Tasvir, is you have this pretty much this big swath, I would say, of friendship. I don't want to say friendship, but pretty much of the whole idea of a union, is that they are at least on good terms. But the thing is Zeratius is only a Celestian priest and not one of the 7 stars. That's where it's very important that Mercer is friends with Sophis. The only problem with him is that he is an X star. That means what's interesting is when Sophis introduces himself into the story, he says that he left on good terms. So that means he is sort of helpful, but he's almost just as influential as just Zeratius is. He's no longer one of the 7 stars. He's no longer this very influential character. But Celesta has nothing wrong with Primordia. And this is really going to set the political state of what's going on. Now we can finally go into Tasvir. So the Tasphere family is the Dias family that we already talked about. So of the Dias family, you got the father, who is Callus, and then his sons, in order, or sons and daughters. So in order from oldest to youngest, you have Aster, you have Tivus, you have Morona, a daughter, and then you have Castler, the youngest. This is very important because Aster is the first in line. It is what's really interesting is the way monarchs are chosen in the Dias family, and the reason why I wouldn't call it it still is a monarchy, so we'll call it a monarchy. But the thing is rather it's a test of champions, or the trial of kings. When at least two sons reach over the age of 18, which is Aster and Tivus, they can then go what's called into the trial of kings, where they prove themselves to see who would become the next king. In the trial of kings, Aster comes out on top. So even being the oldest, he still ends up getting what's called the title of Aster Dias. So what's funny is the last name Dias is a title and a family name. So Aster was always Aster Dias, but now it's also his title, as he is the crowned prince. So when he's introduced into the story, he is referred to as Aster Dias, whereas Tivus is not. Tivus would just be called Tivus, of the Dias family. And so this is where the whole idea of a family name and a title can mesh. And so that is his official title as king. So you have prince and all that. There is no such thing as a prince in the Dias family. If someone is the crown prince, they are called the Dias. So what's really important is during this whole conflict, Callus was actually partial to Cor. He, I would say, supported them. So when Mercer asked for help, Tasphere refused, and actually almost really supported the other side. But of course, Callus is smart. He didn't publicly oppose Mercer because Mercer had so many nations backing him at the time. And also that's important to notice that during Mercer's plot, even though he didn't have a good relationship with Arcona and Dracoburn, he still had everyone else pretty much agreeing that Cor needs to be taken down. Also, what's really important is while Mercer was on his little crusade, all of Ender was under Cor's control. It wasn't until after Mercer's crusade that Dracoburn and Arcona went in and took over this power vacuum. Because when Cor was taken out of the picture, when their leadership was destroyed, they still had people there, but Dracoburn and Arcona took the opportunity to really take advantage of the power vacuum. Slavery was always going on, but this is the first time that they conquered the actual territory. So it's the whole idea of, like, they were taking slaves, like Shiro. They were taking slaves out of Shiro, but they didn't control Shiro. Now, instead of just taking slaves out of Ender, they were controlling parts of Ender. But of course, there was one part of land that nobody wanted, called the No Man's Land. And that is very complicated, and that is the recent world history of all these nations really tied into a video. And of course, if you have any questions, please put in the comments below and ask me anything you want, and I will do my best to answer. Again, this is all conceptual, so there could be inconsistencies. So just let me know how I did and what I can do to improve.